Hello, New York anglers. This is George Skaka, and you're listening to the New York Fishing Podcast. That would be brought to you by nyangler.com, your secret spot online. I don't talk enough about newyorkangler.com. That's my website, which is run by many of the same folks who ran the old northeast.com. And it's just a treasure trove of fishing information, which many anglers have discovered here in New York. So make sure you stop by. If you don't, I guess you're not a real angler. Just remember, everything there is free. We don't charge a dime for anything. So just go on there and you're going to find articles, fishing reports, all kinds of great stuff. So before we get to our guest, who it's a great guest, John McMurray. He's a great tuna fisherman, probably one of the better, if not the best, pop and jig tuna charter operations here in the Northeast. He's also a great bass fisherman. He's a conservationist. He's been involved for a very long. I know him forever. So we'll get into that in a little while. But before we do, I want to bring you an update on the saltwater fishing license here in New York. Some of you may not want to listen to it, so jump to the next chapter. If you do and you have an interest, first of all, if you don't want to listen, shame on you. Look, this is an issue that's going to affect everyone. And if we unite, we can beat this thing. We've done it before, and we can do it again. So I just do want to mention that as I'd like to say, and so it begins. So a letter went out on October 5th. For the record, today is Sunday, October 8th. So on October 5th, the Edward Romaine, the town supervisor out in Brookhaven, who's been around for a long time, carries a lot of weight politically, sent a letter to Governor Hochul, who I'm thinking has no clue what a fish even is. No offense, Gov, but you just don't look like the fishing type. And regardless of my overall feelings of Governor Cuomo, he truly cared about us. I don't think he really do. So anyhow, he sends this letter stating, "We're writing to express our deep concern with the recent actions taken by the DEC to reintroduce the saltwater fishing license. This is on behalf of my 500,000 residents in the town of Brookhaven." So, like I say, and so it begins. There are many other politicians in the background that do want to hear from us and know where we're at. They're not sold on this. They know it's just a money grab that's really not going to do much. It's hard to believe, we don't know. I'd like to point out one thing, that while everyone's saying it's the DEC, and I guess it is, the person behind and in charge of this whole entire thing is someone who's retired from the DEC. So I kind of don't understand. I got to be missing something, but from what I understand, he's been hired as a consultant to move this saltwater license through. Why would that be? Why would it not be coming from our elected officials, the people that we elect to decide who's going to tax us? Because you could call this and you could, like they say, you could put lipstick on a pig, but a pig is a pig. And let me tell you something. This saltwater license is a tax. No getting around it. So look, everyone's got to make their own decision. If you look at the facts, please, I'm not sending out any disinformation or misinformation. I don't know. There's so many different words they use now for that term. I am bringing just the facts, period. And I can tell you right now, the facts are, A, we have a MRAC, which is kind of unbalanced on the recreational side. There's a few folks on there that have been there like forever, and kind of reminds me of our government. There should be term limits. There's just some people that have outlived their stay on these boards. So they're not hearing from us, and there's a few guys on the board, or gals, whatever. Actually, there is a gal on that board that I really like a lot, in that we think the same way. In any case, look, we can beat this thing. We need to get people vocal. So visit enlightening.com. There's a hit list there, or there will be by Tuesday, a hit list of folks that we need to email and let them know that we are opposed to a saltwater fishing license. So I'm going to jump right into my guest. Great guy, John McMurray. I've known him for many, many years. In fact, I could be wrong about this, but I do believe that I introduced him, not just myself, but me, Charlie Whittick. I'm going to say Willie Young was there at the time. So was Bill and Nikki. God bless both of their souls. I miss them both so much. All those folks were there at the time, and we decided to hire John McMurray. And let me tell you what, that was for the CCA New York, which had just started, and we needed an executive director. He stepped in from the Coast Guard, and he took over and went running with the thing, and we did really well. I can't recall, I know it sounds like a low number, but we had over 2,500 people that were paying into the CCA New York to be a member and help us do our work, which we really did a great job in those days. We got the bunker bill passed, we got the bass bill passed, we got the blackfish bill passed. So John had something to do with all of those, and he is here to talk about tuna fishing, striped bass fishing, and he also gets into his thoughts about the current striped bass regulations and the potential for a possible total shutdown of the spring striped bass fishery. I'm not saying that's happening, but I've been saying for years, if you listen to me or go to enlightening.com, I told you this was coming. This, and also, I give it 2 years, you won't be able to take a bass out of the water to take a picture. So those are my two predictions. Anyhow, I'm not going to keep blabbing. We're just going to jump it over to Captain John McMurray, my good friend and fishing conservationist and charter captain. I'm on the line with one of my old friends and one of my favorite anglers who really, he's stayed in the game and managed to make a living out of it. Many people don't know that I was one of the first people to hire this guy straight out of the Coast Guard, and we have forever maintained to be friends. This is John McMurray, tuna fisherman extraordinaire, and we're here to pick his brain on tuna and whatever else I can get out of him. So tell everyone, John, first, welcome to the show, and tell our listeners what exactly, you're in the charter business. Talk about your business a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, George. And it's interesting to hear about the CCA stuff. That must have been 20 years ago, huh?
Oh, yeah. No, longer, I think.
Like it was yesterday. Yeah.
I know.
Wow. Well, listen, I guess this is my, my 20th year in business, in the charter fishing business. I guess I've been full-time for about 10 years. We got 3 offshore boats, 3 tuna boats, 27T. They're all contenders, a 27T, a 31, and a 36.
Nice.
And the tuna thing, we, of course, I kind of grew up or started this thing on inshore trips, and I've always been kind of a inshore guy. Grew up largemouth fishing and throwing poppers and swim baits and topwater stuff for largemouth. And Yeah, that's kind of when I came up here in the Coast Guard back in the early 90s. I kind of, that was my thing. I like to throw topwater stuff for bass back in the marsh and use light tackle, and the whole fly fishing thing was just kind of coming on the scene back then. And as I grew the business, you know, stripers started to tank way back then. They became less available. Yeah. And that kind of killed that saltwater fly fishing light tackle business. I mean, you still get the guys. It just wasn't something you could really make a living on. So I kind of expanded into the offshore stuff. Everybody was talking about the resurgence of bluefin tuna, which, by the way, was like the poster child for overfished fisheries back then, and reasonable good management. I mean, they started to come back in spades, and like, unless you've been living in a cave, like, you know, that the access we have to these fish now compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago is absolutely extraordinary. So, I started venturing a little farther offshore. Back in 2003 or maybe 2004, we had a slug of smaller fish that moved into Ambrose Channel, right at the Ambrose Light. I remember we had like 8 or 9 fish days, and it was all throwing like small toppers and fly gear at them. They're all like 30, 40 pounds, really fun fish. And that kind of got me hooked. And, you know, I started looking for offshore boats. I got that Contender, the 23T in 2005. And then I started like seriously running offshore trips. And I guess what differentiated me from other guys that did that was, you know, I kind of brought that light tackle thing over. I like to throw poppers. I like to jig the light stuff. And it's not that other people weren't doing that, but it kind of, I don't think anybody was really running charters doing that. And I started to bring these inshore guys, these striped bass guys, these fly guys, and bringing them out to do that. And they were like, man, holy shit, this is awesome. And the business kind of blew up from there. You know, it allowed me to build, and you know, I got let go from Norcross, which I worked there for over 10 years. And by that time I built the business up enough to where I could just say, all right, well, guess what? I'm not looking for another job. I'm just going to do this. Yeah. You know, they gave me a little bit of a severance to test it out for a year. And I did, and it worked, and I made enough money. And here I am, man. I'm keeping going. And I got a bunch of guys that work for me, and fuck, man, between all 3 boats, we probably do pretty close to 200, 250 trips a year, depending on the weather.
That's a lot of fishing. So,
yeah, it's not all tuna, but you know, a lot of it. Certainly, most of our trips and most of the money comes from the tuna stuff.
All right, we have many listeners who hear about, you know, this inshore tuna fishery. Right? When I say inshore, I'm talking 20 miles, you know, inside of that. And you know, there are many greenies, people that really have little experience at tuna fishing that are catching some nice bluefin. I've seen some videos of guys catching, releasing bluefin inshore, but there's a lot of people like, you know, everybody wants to know where are the fish, right? So now I'm not asking you for your spots, and we all know there is no one spot, but what are you looking for? Let's say it's one of your first tuna trips of the year. Right. So what are you looking for? You're looking for a certain water pattern, weather pattern, bait pattern?
So, yeah, I mean, with the elephant stuff where you're running long, you're looking for pretty specific water temperature and water color. But with the inshore bluefin stuff, you're not really looking for any of that. I mean, I've had those fish in like 45-degree dirty green water before.
Wow.
So that really doesn't have anything to do with the bluefin stuff. What you're looking for, like if I had to boil it down, is life. You know, birds.
Same old thing. Yeah.
Well, it's not like stripers where you kind of want to find them busting on the surface. You're just looking for any sort of life. You know, it's those storm.
That's offshore.
Yeah. So those storm petrels, we call them tuna chicks, and slicks. When we're talking about that inshore fishery right now, particularly the one where they're kind of keyed in on those squid, it's all about slicks, man. You find that smooth water and the birds, and you set up there and you start working it pretty hard. A lot of people, you know, just kind of go to like the broadcast or one of those well-known spots where they read it on a report somewhere, but it's not about a specific spot. It's about finding those slicks. And whales are another really good indicator. If you got whales, a lot of the fish that we caught on that inshore fishery this year were chasing around dolphin and throwing poppers at dolphin, and they're right under the dolphin.
Wow.
So really, it's kind of any sort of thing that indicates, there's life there, something's being eaten, and you might not always find the tuna there, but you always want to stop and work it pretty hard and then move on.
So how deep are these fish?
Definitely. I don't recommend just going to a spot that you heard somewhere, because it's not really the right.
Yeah, that doesn't work. By the time you get there, we're talking about bluefin tuna that can swim pretty much as fast as they want.
Right. And you read something on the interwebs about a bite at a certain area. By the time, you get there, it's probably pretty spent.
So you're looking for, when it's bluefin, you're just looking for life, which is what we always did when we went offshore, even sharking, you look for life and you kind of set up there. So like you kind of, I don't see many people, or I don't see photos or videos of many people doing what you do. I'm sure they're out there. But I have to tell you, you take that same picture all the time, but it doesn't get tired. I could look at every single one of those things. And even though they kind of look the same, I'm like, wow, look at that fish. Look at the eyeball. Look at this. Look at that. I'm like, so you're catching.
Beautiful fish. If you could manage to take a picture before they flop around the deck and get all bloody, and you wash them off, they're extraordinarily beautiful. And you see the guys with like the 8 or 9 fish lined up on the deck, all gray and shit. That's kind of not my thing,
No, never was, and it's not mine either. Media.
Yeah, people got all bent out of shape because I said that was kind of gross, but it is, man. It's ugly.
You got to call it as you see it, John. We all feel differently about different things, but we ultimately, we all want the same thing, right? We all want a good fisher. Yeah. So, all right. So you're, all right. So you come up, let's say now how deep are these bluefin? Anyway, I'm curious. Some guys are telling me they're getting them like 40 feet.
It's a little different. Yeah. It's a little different every year. When we had those giants move in, man, they were 50, 60 feet of water, but that's not really my thing. You can't really, and there's a certain level of fish that you can catch on spinning gear. Once they get over like 150 pounds, 200 pounds, it's like, it's not fun anymore after that. It's possible. It's just not fun. But we did that inshore thing a few times, and I bought 80 wides and all that gear for that. And I gotta admit, it's pretty fun. The first time I went, I'm letting a bunker out, and 30 feet away from the boat, explosion in the water, it gets ripped out of my hand.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Oh, it's so cool, man. And we're looking at Rockaway, while this is happening. I just
crazy.
I can't really book those trips. So my deal is it's just spinning gear, the poppers and the jigs and stuff. But those fish were 50, 60 feet of water. This 55 to 65 inch class of fish that we had this year, that was in kind of like 80, 90 foot, but it's still pretty shallow.
Oh, yeah. It's not like, I got a second place down in Florida, 80, 90 feet, you're running 60 miles.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're running 15 to 20 miles.
Exactly.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
So you're looking for life. And what kind of plugs are you guys using? I'm curious. But go ahead. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. This kind of relates to the plug selection thing too. When we first got those fish, I would love to say I found them. I didn't. A friend of mine found them very early before anybody knew about any of this, and called me in. And we had a good 2 or 3 days where they were just crushing poppers. No other boats around. And you get on these slicks, and you wouldn't see them bust or anything, but occasionally you'd see one in the distance. Maybe it was a dolphin, maybe it was bluefin. You don't know, but you set up on these slicks and you just blind cast poppers, and they were getting absolutely crushed. It was crazy. We had a good 3 days of that before the fleet found them. But the poppers that I'm using, and I can't really tell you if it's this specific popper that works so well or if I've just developed so much faith in it, but it's those Mad Manus cherry pops, or I guess, I don't know, he's changed the name a bunch of times. But they're Mad Manus, and they're the white, and I guess you call it frostbite. They're white and they glow, and they have those red spots on them. It's nothing, crazy. It doesn't look terribly unique to me, but I've just caught so many on that particular plug. Like, I'm afraid to use anything else. They make another one. It's I guess it's called Ghost. You could see through it. we caught quite a few on those this year. I think he came out with them a couple of years ago. But it's really just those two poppers. And for a while, we're catching them on stick baits. But that seems to that was when we first started doing this, everybody was like, no, they don't eat poppers. They don't eat poppers. They only eat stick baits. But, clearly that was bullshit, or it was a Cape Cod thing. It's because down here, they absolutely hit poppers. So,
well, I mean, you would think they would.
Man. Yeah, right. I think the deal with stick baits, the sinking ones in particular, like the, oh gosh, what's the name of those? The Rhode Islands. Anyway, you fish them underneath the water so the shearwaters don't get them.
Right.
We don't really have that here, so they absolutely murder poppers. And man, there's nothing in the world like seeing a 100-pound class or even 150-pound class fish crush a popper. It's like somebody drops a piano in the water and the whole boat freaks out. Everybody starts screaming. Yeah. No matter how many times you see it, it's still fucking nuts, Oh,
it's got to be, because I can recall, I've done my tuna fishing in my days, but I mean, like I'm no expert, but I have landed a lot of fish. And, we didn't fish the way you are, but even, trolling, green machine, whatever the heck we were trolling, you would, if you're always looking, right? If you're a real fisherman, you're not looking anywhere except at those freaking baits for every second. And to see those fish come up and take the bait, or even I'll go down to albacore.
It's violent. There's no other way to describe it.
Oh, my God. They are freaking crazy. And they're 100% solid muscle, And I mean, I had one thing.
One thing that I want listeners to hear and understand very clearly is that when you get a fish to hit that popper and you freeze like a deer in headlights, it's going to get off every time. You got to set that hook. I tell people, rip its face off 3 times as hard as you can.
Really?
What I don't often tell people, and I forget to tell people, is got to reel while you do it. Some people try to set the hook and the line goes slack. Anyway, sometimes you're fishing all day for these things and you get one strike. And if you fuck that up and you don't set the hook, and I act a little annoyed, I mean, you try not to be. These people are paying you good money to do this. You try not to get annoyed at people, but sometimes you can't help it, Well, especially when it's your only shot.
So wait, John, hold on. Have you turned into a grumpy old captain already at this young age?
No, man, definitely not. But
because I get yelled at sometimes. Even till today, I'll go on a charter. What the hell are you doing? Why aren't you?
I'm sure you saw that video of this guy screaming at his client down in Florida, and that was totally unacceptable. But on the other hand, you kind of understand where the guy was coming from,
Oh my God, I have to laugh at that. Yeah.
Anyways, it's some people you get on the boat, they're really good fishermen, know what they're doing. Other ones, you tell them a million times not to do something and they do it. Or you tell them to do something and they don't do it. It's hard not to get angry or annoyed. But anyway, when I do that and I end up screaming at somebody, I always apologize profusely.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, as the guy,
I feel bad.
Yeah, well, you know what, John? As the guy who's been screamed at, okay, I can tell you don't get over it. It's very hard. When they get over it, the time they get over it is when they get another fish on. Then they forgot about all of that crap. And you know what? One of the best I used to fish on a party boat for bluefin, and it was crazy back in those days. And I fished on the Klondike with Pete Pearson, and he was a maniac, right? He'd be up on that fly, but he'd be running around the boat screaming at every single angler. I brought my own tackle, right? I brought a 80-pound wide, but I only had 50-pound test. So somehow he happens to look at it. What the hell is this? I go, well, it's an 80 wide. I got 50-pound test. Back in those days, I was thinking, give the fish a chance. I had no clue that I'd be hooking up on these 300-pound freaking big eyes. And I couldn't even use my own stuff. But I get it, because when I switched to his tackle, I was catching, I was managing to land them. So nothing wrong with being an old salt. Kind of comes with the game. So, John, again, when I see your photos, I mean, I'm not the biggest Facebooker kind of guy, but, I go on there and, I'll see your photos and I'll see what you become and how you stayed with the fishery. And how you respect the fishery. A lot of people may think you respect it a little bit too much. I don't. But, I know where you're coming from. I know you better than most people. I'll just put it to you that outside of, I know you for the longest time. So I got to ask you, so we're talking about tuna and we kind of got past that a little bit. Well, you know what? Talk to me a little bit about the yellowfin. How deep are you going for those?
Sometimes it's 125, 130 feet. Most of the time it's in that 240-foot range.
Right.
We had them like in between the channels. I don't know. Gosh, it's trying to figure out what time of the year it was. It was this year. We had them right at the end of the channels in barely 100 feet of water, but that's anomalous. It doesn't usually happen. But yeah, it's the same kind of deal. You're looking for life. Right now, it's kind of specific to the squid trawlers. If you find squid trawlers, they're always behind there. I mean, right now, like late September into October is probably the best the yellowfin fishing gets. It's just a matter of getting weather windows to get to them. But you have all these squid trawlers, and they're not terribly hard to find. You just look at AIS, and sometimes they're pretty far, sometimes they're close. But you get right up on them, and I always get underway with a couple live wells full of peanut bunker, and you get behind them, and you start throwing them, and they come up, and you throw a beer can at them, and they'll eat it. They get fired up like that. You drop
like a bluefin, huh?
Yeah. And, that's going back to like respecting the fishery. That's when you could pretty much clean up. But I kind of put a cap on 7 fish, which again, I think is a lot when you're talking about 50 to 80 pound fish, even 100.
It's a lot of meat.
It's a lot. And, technically they're allowed to keep 3 per person. You got 4 guys, you're talking about 12 fish. But, what the hell happens to all that fish? You got to question. And the guys that want to kill all these fish, it's like they show up with one 65 quart Yeti. It's like, what the F are you going to take all this fish home with? So I try to shut it down unless somebody can clearly articulate what they're going to do with the fish. I shut it down at 7 fish. And even at 7 fish, I end up having to keep a lot and give them away to my neighbors. Or,
well, you can always call me.
I eat so much.
I'll drive wherever I have to.
Yeah.
Because I'm buying it online half the time.
The whole term limiting out, it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Fishing isn't about limiting out. And sometimes, you go out there and you grind it out all day and you get one fish. But that one fish, that's such an extraordinary experience to some people that, it ends up being a great trip and everybody is stoked. And it really rubs me the wrong way when you get back to the dock and everybody's like, how many did you get? How many did you get? Like it's a fucking competition, It's not.
Yeah.
You want you guys to be happy, I'm happy with a handful of fish, even one extraordinary fish. That's a great trip.
Yeah, I'm
not happy is when I don't catch shit. I'm not going to lie to you about that.
Hey, look, there's no guarantee, right? It's fishing, and if you're not catching, there aren't a heck of a lot of people that are catching. But I can relate to what you said regarding just that one fish because I did a lot of fluke fishing out at Cholera and that whole area this year, and it was just red hot. And then one day we went out and it was just horrible. We couldn't even come across a keeper, but there was one keeper and it was pushing 8 pounds. And that carried us for the day, that one fish. Yeah. Even though we didn't get any other keepers, we kind of didn't care because we had that one fish. So,
and that's an extraordinary fish. So a couple of years ago, the yellowfin, we had a lull in the yellowfin bite. And it was a Saturday and it was flat calm. Everybody was out and I have the inReach, so I got a pretty wide network of guys I communicate with. And, I had guys at Bacardi, I had guys at Coimbra, I had guys on the west wall, I had guys on the east wall. Nobody was doing shit anywhere. And we found some fish at the Virginia, which, as you know, is pretty close compared where all these guys are running. We had dolphin there. We had dolphin life and birds, and we stuck on those dolphin all day because I knew, there's nowhere else to go. I'm not going to go burn fuel to not catch fish somewhere else. We chased them around all day, and we had one fish that was probably, a hair over 100 pounds, 62, 63 inches. We had one fish come up in front of a dolphin school and absolutely just destroy a popper.
Wow.
And everybody went fucking nuts. And we landed this thing and everybody got a photo with it. And we got back to the dock. That seems like it was definitely the only fish that was caught in my network. But the point is, like, it wasn't about like how many we killed. It was about that one fish. And that made the day like awesome. I still talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, again, I've seen that over and over where one time you're going to have that one fish that can carry the day and you're happy with that fish, So, look, let's, so we discussed tuna. I'm going to say from what I can see, you're like, this seems to be your space, and I know you're really good at it. And folks, if you want to get in touch with John, we'll set that up at the end of the podcast. But I want to discuss something else. I'm hoping that you may want to talk about it. And it's the current situation in striped bass. I mean, you're in the industry, right? And I'm just going to give you my take real quick. There's scuttlebutt going around about shutting this fishery down. There were people I spoke with. Actually, we've been talking about this for 3 years. We kind of all saw this coming.
Yeah.
I believe it's all based on poor data, and I don't blame any manager. They get data and then they have to respond. But I'm curious what your thoughts were, the way ASMFC handled the 28 to 31 inch fish. I'm going to tell you, I oppose it for a number of reasons, in that if it's an emergency, it was such an emergency, and they gave charter boats no heads up and they just kind of shut it down, then why are all the commercials allowed the bigger fish? If it was an emergency, and I'm not going after commercials. I'm not making this a recreational commercial thing. I'm just saying.
So, I hear where you're coming from. And it's kind of difficult for me to tiptoe around this subject without burning bridges on one side or the other.
Got to be honest, John.
But honestly, dude, I don't really give a shit. So let me just be honest, okay?
Go ahead.
I've got an extraordinary fishery in the New York Bight, in the lower New York Harbor area in particular. It's the last 2 years, there are more fish around than I've seen in 20 years. And folks will say that that's just specific to New York. Well, we're kind of at the epicenter in the spring and the fall. And yeah, maybe a lot of those fish are Hudson fish. But when you start to look up the coast, it's hard to not acknowledge that it's not gotten better in the last several years up and down the coast, with the very blatant exception of the Chesapeake Bay. That seems to have completely shit the bed. And why, the folks argue that it's climate change. Could be overfishing contributing, but I think there's some sort of northward movement of the striped bass.
Absolutely, and they're going to follow the bait, John.
I don't have a lot of science to prove that, but it's intuitive. Now, folks will argue that the Chesapeake produces 68% of the coastal stock, and you could just look at a chart and understand why. It's huge. And then those fish go back to their natal rivers, and that's to some extent true. But there's also fish that go back to the Hudson and the Delaware. And, while the data doesn't really show it, those fisheries seem to be more prolific than they were. And then you work your way up the coast all the way up to the Kennebec, and certainly the Kennebec seems to be producing more fish. And you go up to the frickin' Miramichi in Canada, and that's there's a huge spawning population there now. So something is happening, I think, and the data. Let's be clear about the data here. We're being this fishing or this spawning stock biomass target that we're trying to reach is kind of a side effect of the data recalibration, which was 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
And we're being asked, and without getting into too much detail about that, it showed that the fishing effort was a lot higher than they thought, and so the spawning stock biomass must be higher than they thought. So they ended up setting that biomass goal at a pretty damn high level, and some would argue almost unattainable, particularly given the poor recruitment that's happened in the Chesapeake. I mean, when you look at the time series, we've only achieved it in 4 years out of a 40-year time series. it's possible to achieve, and if we have good recruitment, which we kind of don't right now, but it's going to be really hard to achieve that. And even with that tiny slot limit that we have right now, it's showing that we're not going to achieve it, by the deadline, which is 2029. Now, with all that in mind, I do, kind of on and off the record, I guess, I think, maybe we're overreaching with that. I think these people that talk about a moratorium are fucking batshit crazy. You can't, just having seen the amount of fish, I just can't imagine shutting it down. It just doesn't seem warranted to me. And George, I'm not a kill-all guy. I've been a conservation guy since you know me. But I also think you have to be reasonable in your management. You have to have some access, or else you lose the people that advocate for it.
Exactly. Look, John, I'm a firm believer in exactly what you said. By cutting out or restricting wrecks from this fishery will only hurt the fishery. I really believe, because they're the stewards.
We should be very clear about one thing here, and that's that, the catch and release guys, and to be honest, most of my clients don't want to keep stripers. Some do. I'm not going to argue that. I don't
they like to eat them. Yeah, you gotta.
Right. But the discard mortality accounts for 50% of the total mortality. So these guys who think they're innocent by releasing every fish are not. And guess what? When they shut this fishery down, if they shut it down, if they do what's called no target closures, guess what? That means it's illegal for you to even target them. So when you go around talking about shutting it down in a moratorium, guess what? That means you too, buddy. So, I'm a little concerned about how we're going to get to this biomass target in 2029 without shutting it down.
Well, John, let me ask you now, isn't 229, isn't it kind of like an arbitrary number, that like a number that was picked? It's like, it doesn't have to happen by then.
Yes, I'm not going to argue that it's not arbitrary, but it's 10 years from the time when the stock was declared overfished. We have a stock assessment that says the stock is technically below the spawning stock biomass threshold. It's overfished, and then the commission approves it, and that sets the clock at 10 years. Now, it's arbitrary, but if you don't have some sort of timeline, having sat on both the commission and the council, they will just put it off and never achieve it. So I do understand that 10-year timeline, but what I question really is whether or not we've managed to set this biomass target too high.
Right.
And just given what I've seen on the water and what folks see all the way up to Maine, there's a lot of fish around, and how the hell are we going to keep fishing mortality at a low level when there's all these fish around? It's like that sort of opportunity drives participation. It's more guys are going to fish if there's more fish around. So it's a fucking big problem, and it needs to be figured out before we unnecessarily shut this down. Well,
we need people to be part of the process, which we don't have really anymore. Not as many. It's like kind of down to just.
Well, listen, Joe, I did that shit for too long, for 15 years.
Me too.
And it sucks. It's like you're banging your head against the wall. And I'm not going to say your voice doesn't matter. You don't achieve things. And certainly you can do more when you sit behind the table. But when you got a business to run and kids to raise, and everybody's going to fucking hate you, whatever decision you make, one side's going to hate you. And believe me, they're very vocal about it on social media, et cetera. And they don't pull any punches either, man.
Well, so I know. You were a punching bag for a while.
Yeah. So it's hard to find good people to take on that role and to represent fishermen. It's really difficult to find the right person. And I understand why.
Yeah, no, I do too. Hey, what do you think? I didn't go. You know what I've been through. So, but to me, it's just part of the process. Most people don't really understand what's happening. But this striped bass fishery, I've always been an advocate. I'm a conservation-minded guy, but at the same time, I want fairness amongst both sides. And we didn't see that in this case. They came out, it's an emergency. They gave you guys, when I say you guys, I'm going to say the charter boat industry, like zero time for you to tell your clients, sorry, guys, they just reduced the slot in half.
People really got screwed on that. And it's not me particularly, because I don't get a lot of guys that, I mean, it'll probably affect me a little bit, but not much. But I couldn't imagine some of my colleagues are really gonna, people fish. They're different parts of the industry. People fish with certain guys as they want to take fish home, and it's going to be pretty damn hard to find a fish within that slot.
Well, the more we fish it, the less there are. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And why are we protecting all these monster fish, the big fish that are going to die in a couple of years, and we're freaking killing we're not killing everything. We're not killing many. And let me ask you, do you buy that 9%? I don't buy 9% release mortality. I just don't buy it.
Let me give you my opinion, which is just an opinion. But it's based on the last 20 years of fishing for these things. Right. I do think probably 1 in 10, 1 in 11 fish I release die. Like they get gill hooked or gut hooked, or it does seem reasonable to me. And it's a lot lower than it is in other fisheries. I think bluefish is 10% or 12 or something like that. But it's just the sheer number of people targeting them and releasing them that makes the overall discard mortality so high. Because when you extrapolate that 9% across all the guys fishing for them, then it's going to be significant.
No, I know, but I've seen so many studies. When I say so many, like half a dozen, and one of them was done here in New York by John Pellegrino. He used to run a boat on the North Shore, and DEC or ASMFC, this is years ago, probably when you first got in here, they commissioned him to do a catch and release to help them with a catch and release study. And they set up a pen somewhere in Huntington Bay. They caught a bunch of fish. They threw them in there, and they had a 2% mortality rate. Every single one of those fish was caught on a hook and line. So, like they kind of don't look to me, that they don't look at all the data. I can see you agreeing with it because, you get gut hooked fish and people are pulling.
And there's been a lot of work at UMass. I think maybe it's MIT, but they're doing some work on discard mortality. And, nothing has been peer reviewed yet. But from what I understand, their numbers are pretty close to what we're currently using. And again, just back to anecdotal shit and my experience is like, all right, well, you got the fly guys who are holier than thou and never kill any fish and say they don't gut hook.
Oh, they're cooking.
That's not true, because you're stripping that fly through and there's that, like in between when you're pulling and you're going to grab the line, they'll eat that fly and they'll get it right in their gill every time.
Right.
I also, when you're fishing plugs, and I went through a phase where I used single hooks because I didn't want to kill all these fish. But, you get guys, particularly guys that don't fish well, and you just miss a ton of fish.
Yeah.
You can't tell me you're going to, even if you legislate it, that people are only going to use single hooks. I mean, there's no way to enforce it. So I do think, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and bullshit and tell you that the discard mortality isn't significant. It is, but I also think it's kind of like a red herring for managers. Like you can't really address discard mortality. You could try to do things like require circle hooks for bait or J hooks for plugs, but and most people are going to be compliant. But that's really not going to make much of a difference. You can't even quantify it from a science perspective. You can't quantify that savings. It's always going to exist in the fishery, and you can't address it. And my opinion is that you address the things that you can. You address, the commercial side. They're killing every fish that they catch, and it's a drop in the bucket compared to the recreational side. My point is you manage targeted deaths. You manage killing fish, because that's the only thing that you really can manage. I think all this bullshit with trying to focus on discards isn't going to help out at all. What it is going to do is it's going to put me out of business if they close down, April for striped bass for me, or May even.
Well, look, John,
November. Like those are big months.
I'm saying for years just so you know, for years that this was coming, and they were coming out, they were going to specifically go after you guys because those fish are headed to the Hudson or headed out of the Hudson. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I totally predict, I'm going to give you another prediction. I'm going to give it 1 year, maybe 2, where you will not be able to pull a striped bass out of the water unless it's legal size. These people are no longer, it's in Florida. You can't take snook out of the water.
I could live with that. I could live with that, George. I wouldn't be ideal because people want photos. You know, if you're catch and release fishing, people want their Instagram and Facebook pictures,
right,
you know, and
right.
They don't get that. They, you know, they may or may not fish with me, but, you know, I could probably survive that. What I couldn't survive is no targeting, because if they tell me I can't target striped bass in April, May because they're going up to Hudson, then, you know, I can't. First of all, most people are not going to be compliant. You get boarded, they're just going to say they're fishing for bluefish. But a guy like me can't do that. I can't do that and get away with it. You know, those party boat guys would have a field day on me if I was marketing bluefish trips in April. There's no fucking bluefish around in April. Right. So it's really going to hurt if it happens. And honestly, everybody keeps telling me, no, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. Well, I don't see how they're going to avoid it. It's 50% of the mortality. And there are people on the commission that really want to see that happen. They want to see, you know, the holier than thou catch and release guys, myself included, get punished for this. And they're not wrong, because we're part of the problem.
Yeah, but no, they are wrong. I'm sorry. They are wrong, because let me tell you something. If you take it all away from us and we don't care about that fishery is going to end up 100% in the hands of the commercial fishermen. And we don't want that happening, right? So, you know, let me ask you this question. So in fisheries management, they manage by pounds, right? We don't really care about pounds. We care about the numbers of fish, whereas commercial fishery cares about pounds. So are we allotted X amount of pounds a year? I mean, I don't really get how they're managing our piece of it. And, you know, like, I've actually seen states that have, like, they have regs in pounds for commercials and in inches for recreational.
I'm not sure how that works. And once you get into the science side of things, it's kind of like above my pay grade. I was never a math guy. Yeah. But it does seem kind of silly. And I know there's folks that have been asking for that sort of poundage versus fish method to be changed. But I don't know enough about it to say something.
All right. So here's another question. So again, you probably don't know, but I want your take on it. So they tell us how great circle hooks are, right? And I agree. I'm not disagreeing. And so they implement circle hooks over the last, what is this, 3rd, 4th year? And why are we still at 9% bycatch mortality?
So
shouldn't that be reduced?
I touched on this earlier. There's no way to quantify the benefit of gear changes. There has to be a scientific method that allows you to say X. We've saved X% on using this gear type, and one doesn't exist. So we could put all these gear type regulations in the books that we want. It will not help that 9% number one bit. You know, is it the right thing to do? Do you want to reduce discards, whether they show up on paper or not? Yeah. But let me just say something about that circle hook requirement. You know, there are no fewer people snag and dropping now than they were before that requirement.
Oh yeah. No, look, I'm not.
It's unenforceable, so they're not going to comply. And if they do get boarded, you just say you're targeting bluefish or something. So it's kind of silly.
Yeah, look, I always said fisheries regulations and rules are voluntary. You know, when a fisherman goes out, either he's a poacher that doesn't give a shit about regulations or sizes, or he's the kind of guy that's, you know, or gal that's going to stick by the regulations.
So the managers would argue that most people are going to be compliant
right.
by nature. And I agree with that with something like size and bag limits. But when you talk about something that most people view as ridiculous, like no target closures or even gear restrictions, they just won't comply, particularly if there's no repercussions for them not complying. So folks, like Mike Luisi in the Maryland contingent will argue, yes, we can implement these no target closures where you can't even be out there targeting for striped bass, and yes, they will work, but there's just no way in my mind that they would have any discernible effect on the striped bass population. You just have people are not going to stop fishing. It's just not going to happen.
Well, they could ruin it for us. They could ruin it.
They'll ruin it for me. They just the average Joe and it's not going to reduce fishing mortality at all. So
yeah, but it reduces participation.
I've made that argument, George, around the table at the commission, and people just flat out disagree. They're like, "You're wrong. Your data shows that there's X amount of compliance," but I think it's bullshit.
Yeah, look, I think we all know that where you're talking about fishing specifically, there are more freaking striped bass in there than there have ever been, ever. Mm-hmm. And whether that be because of the water's warming, more fish moving out of the bay. I don't know why fish would stay in the Chesapeake when there's just nothing for them to eat. I mean, nothing.
Right.
So that's why they're kind of moving. So they come here where, we passed, thanks to you were part of it. We passed that bunker bill back in the days, and we are the envy of the coast. And we have all this life and all these bass coming in here, and we rebuilt this. And now they're they haven't yet, but there's a good chance they're going to tell you can't target those fish. While at the same time, you're probably aware, they're doing PCB studies to open that section up to the commercial fishery. Yeah. So they're going to shut us out and at the same time say, okay, the PCBs are low enough. Let's let these guys fish commercially in that area. And again, I don't want to make this recreation or commercial. What I'm trying to point out is that the basis for this whole idea is wrong. We have the fish. The fish are here. We have more fish than we ever had. There's some spots where, you hear, oh, there aren't that many, but there aren't that many in the 28 to 31 inch size because we're targeting them all. It just doesn't make sense to me. We're going to wipe out a whole year class. I don't understand that for the life of me. But anyway, the bottom.
Yeah, so a couple of things. It's hard to understand that small slot and how it won't just whack like a one solid year class. But those, it's not really about targeting specific year classes or reducing mortality on specific year classes, even though we tried to do that with the last amendment, Amendment 7, where we looked at different scenarios that would hopefully protect those 2015s, the Chesapeake Bay 2015s, which is a really strong year class. And none of them showed any sort of benefit to the overall fishery in achieving that spawning stock biomass target by 2029, because they just shifted effort to other year classes. So that's where that came from. That was that emergency regulation was a way to reduce fishing mortality in a quick, expedient manner. Now the commercial thing, when you talk to Emerson Hasbrook, who was the other commissioner. And he's one of the leads for that study. And he's got a good argument, okay, well, yes, we're looking at allowing our fishermen to maybe kill more Hudson fish so they could sell them. But it's the commercial guys that have been responsible for the overfishing, not the commercial guys. The commercial guys are managed on a flat quota,
right?
And when they
with
achieve that
tags,
quota, they can't kill any more fish. We're size and bag limits, so once the effort increases, which is usually the result of abundance, then our fishing mortality goes through the roof. So we should be the ones that have to shoulder the burden, not the commercial guys. And it doesn't seem fair, but it also doesn't seem unfair when you look at it from Emerson's perspective.
No. First of all, I'm not saying that, but don't shut us down and open them up at the same time, because it's pretty obvious you're shutting us down to open them up. And another point, John, you gotta think about is these regulations they don't put something like this into effect in an emergency just to reduce, buy, catch, take, whatever. They do it to reduce effort. And that's the thing that, as an advocate for sport fishermen, it's one thing I cannot stand when they pull that. And the bottom line is, I know for a fact, I've asked so many anglers that like to take a fish home. They're not bass fishing. They're just not. I mean, what is that? Maybe, even if it's just 10%, it is, people like to take a bass home to eat. So, they're not going to do it with this lottery slot. I mean, these party boats, as well as I do, they were freaking packing them for striped bass. Not happening now. So,
I was talking to, what's his name? The guy from Capture Pride.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I forget, they've changed owners.
Yeah, Ken Higgins. He's a good dude,
Kenny, right? Good guy, really good guy.
So I'm talking to him the other day, and he's he's very honest. He's like, I know you disagree with me on this stuff, which I actually don't disagree with him on a lot of stuff. He says, this is going to kill me. I'm not going to get the guys. But when I did talk to him a few days later, he was telling me that he was booking up pretty good for those bass shows. My point is that, as long as there's the opportunity to kill one, as long as there's the chance, I think those people are still going to go. But once you start telling people you can't target them, then you're fucked, man.
Oh, it's over.
That's going to be the end. That's going to be the end of shit.
Wow.
So that's really what's got me real worried. And again, like a lot of the advocates for striped bass conservation keep telling me that's not going to happen. But I sat around the table and I listened to people at the hospitality suites talk about it. I mean, hopefully they're right, and it doesn't happen, but it seems likely to me that it can and will happen.
Well,
at the very least, we're going to lose some seasons. We're going to lose part of the season. I think that's inevitable at the next meeting.
Yeah, and it's going to be the spring season. They're going to protect those spawners
our
coming in.
fishery is in the early spring and the late fall. That's when it peaks for us, and those are the most likely months to get whacked.
That'd be horrible. I mean, that would be a disaster. That would be like, when I started Northeast in 89, you couldn't catch a striped bass. And here we are now where there are more fish than I have ever heard of or seen. There are people right now that they can't catch a fish under like 30 pounds. Imagine you used to look for the big fish, and now you can't catch anything within that slot. And
it's interesting, George. You remember when you wanted to get a 50? I'm thinking about Willie Young.
I still want a 50.
Well, listen, he to get his 50, he spent a week every year in Block Island in like mid-October, late October, and he was fish the beach all night to get that 50. He did it for years, probably close to a decade, and he finally got his 50. Now, any jackass with a sea ray could go out, at 10 o'clock and snag a bunker and get a 50. It's totally changed. The fishery has. I've seen more 50s and 60s in the last 3 years than I've seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the size of these fish is like
I've never seen anything like it. They're all over the web.
Big fish. It's slot fish. It's small fish, and there does seem to be a dearth of schoolies, but otherwise there's just a like I said, it's the best fishing I've had in 20 years.
Yeah, well, they're saying there are none. I think what's happening is, like you said, look, with everything else, I did a whole series on a podcast on this. I mean, things are changing. The waters are, I'm not just saying, yeah, the waters are warming, but the climate is warming. And everything is changing. Fish are moving out of areas. New fish are moving in. I mean, there's literally a targeted tarpon fishery in Massachusetts this year. I'm like, what? People are catching freaking tarpon up there. So, we're in the middle of this change. But one thing is not going to change, and that is that the Hudson River, I believe, has developed into the greatest sporting ground for striped bass on the East Coast. Because there's no commercial take, there's no netting, there's no shit in there.
So anecdotally, that does seem to be the case, and it, that entire spring Raritan fishery, those got to be Hudson fish, right? How could they not be Hudson?
They are,
but right, and that fishery seems to be getting better and better every year.
Absolutely,
the pressure that fishery is under is extraordinary, but it doesn't seem to be knocking it down at all, which is interesting. But you look at the juvenile abundance indices in the Hudson River, and they're not a whole lot. If you draw a line through them, it does appear to be on the upswing, but it's not extraordinary over the entire time series. And you would think that the Hudson is producing more of the fish, but it's not really. And it all goes back to
you have a lot more faith. You have a lot more faith in the numbers than I do. Like, I kind of just look at what's happening, and I don't look at their numbers, and I'm like, this fishery is the greatest fishery ever.
Yeah, and I think that's how most people think about things. But if you start to just, rely on what people say and what people experience, and you have no data, then it kind of allows people to represent their own interests. Like the data is there's no subjectivity. It's the data, and that's kind of like what you in the end, and when you're making management decisions, that's what you got to rely on. Otherwise, it's chaos.
No, I get that, but there's just times where you look and you see what's happening, and then you look at the data and you're like, I don't even in my mind. The Hudson River, if they could keep everything the way it is, keep the commercials out, don't be targeting with gill nets, they'll destroy that fishery. It's bad enough with the shad fishermen in there with their nets. Yeah. But if you can continue to keep it the way it is, that fishery is going to thrive and thrive and thrive. We have more bait than anyone. So, look, when I say I feel bad for the charter industry right now that built up this beautiful following of striped bass fishermen, they're teaching etiquette. My other point is we're going with a 9% catch and release number that hasn't changed, John. I want you to think about this. That hasn't changed for like 20 years. So are you telling me in the last 20 years we haven't changed our etiquette? We haven't done more as anglers to save more fish. You're not going to give us anything? I mean, we're doing more to save those fish.
People are definitely more conscious of how they handle and release fish now. That's an interesting point that you brought up. We're not. Don't expect to get rewarded for that.
No. I know that's my point, but because they can't find data on it, and my complaint I always have, I might have said it before, I'll say it again, is fisheries management lacks common sense. They need
you're absolutely right.
Some common sense in there to say, what are we doing?
So the problem with that, and I'll just give you a quick example. We sat there at the table for 4 fucking hours and talked about whether or not a tube and worm was legal under the new regulation.
Oh my God.
That's how fucking stupid that sort of thing is. Like common sense, let the guys use. It's not bait. You're just tipping the
exactly. You've never got hooked a fish that way ever. You can't. It's not sucking it in. I mean,
but the problem is you can't make those sort of common sense decisions without data to support them, because if you do, one of the NGOs will come right in and sue the shit out of you.
Right.
Well, not necessarily at the commission, but at the council.
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
So I do understand, but yeah, I mean, that conversation in particular was so frustrating. And I think I made a comment on the record about how ridiculous it was, but it didn't slow it down at all. These guys just sit there and talk in circles for hours. It's terrible. Drove me nuts.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, look, I'm glad that we got to talk, and it sounds to me. Not that you have come around. I think you've known these things all the time, and you've been trying to affect it however you can. But now
the fishery's different now. Like back when we started focusing on conserving striped bass, the fishery was starting to shit the bed, and we all saw it on the water, and the data hadn't manifested. Now we have a tremendous increase. So. I still consider myself a conservationist, and if I don't have this resource to utilize, not only do I go out of business, but I lose my fucking mind. Like I'm addicted to this now.
Yeah.
But if you inch over into one side of the argument at all, if you try to take a middle ground, you try to explain to people what you see on the water and how maybe this flat limit is gratuitous or an overreach, and certainly shutting the fishery down is not necessary. And it might be good for the bass, but it's not good for the people who stand up for bass and always have. And that kind of puts you in the crosshairs for some people. And I think that's a reflection of just the political climate in general. Everything is so polarized. You're either on the left or you're on the right, and you can't be in the middle, or else, you're a traitor to someone.
Well,
I think that's kind of the way people some people might be perceiving me right now as like, I thought he was the conservation guy. Well, yeah, I am, but there's a fucking shit ton of fish around right now. Do we really need to be talking about a closure? I mean, it's all counterintuitive. And anyway, I just wanted to explain my thinking and my views on things now, and they're quite a bit different than they were half a dozen years ago, and that's because the fishery is quite a bit different.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I don't think your views are different. The fishery is different, and
right.
You know what? You're speaking. You're looking at it, and you're seeing it. I'm glad you have. I mean, I know you always have. And as far as you being a conservationist, you don't need to explain that to anybody, because you are. People know that. I mean, I'm not going to say most, but many charter captains are conservationists. Most want to keep that fishery alive so they can continue to work. And without you folks, you can't introduce people to fishing. So in my mind, keeping you guys going is very important to us, very. And to just shut you down on what we would call bad data at a time when there's more fish, all because they don't want you to catch fish. They're making it so hard for us to catch fish that, look, you had no choice but to look at it both ways. And I respect you for that. I always did. We haven't always agreed on things, but you and I, we don't, like, you're probably more in favor of a license than me. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But that's okay. So I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, left or right. I care about fishing, participation. It's all about getting new people in fishing. And in New York, it really is New York. We get in the way of so many different fisheries. And once things start going, there's always cutbacks. It's this, it's that. And the way I see it in this state is recreational anglers really are treated as second class. Maybe that's the same up and down the coast. I don't know. But in this state, we are. Think about it. Go down the coast. How many states have these huge fishing piers that they have educational classes? They take people out fishing to see, what they have to offer. We don't have any of that. So don't feel like you're not being conservation minded because, you want to continue fishing for striped bass. We all want to. And if there were no fish, and we wouldn't want to.
I'm not thinking I'm not a conservationist anymore, but I do, I hear scuttlebutt from other people.
Yeah, but you know what? Yeah, they don't. Oh, he wants to keep fish now. Oh, he wants to keep it open, even though he wants to keep it open because when he goes out there, it's freaking bass paved everywhere. And, the only spot that's a little weak, and there actually aren't, it's just slot fish, is North Fork, but everywhere else, there are tons of striped bass, and more striped bass than maybe I can ever recall. I mean, people that don't even want striped bass are catching them at times. They're targeting albies, I see, and they're getting striped bass. So
I was having a discussion with another charter boat captain a few weeks ago and about, how much more difficult it is to book striped bass trips than it used to be. And it's because, his opinion was that it was because it's so damn easy now. Like you go out on your buddy Joe's Sea Ray, like I said, at 10 o'clock and catch them. Whereas, you kind of needed a professional when things weren't as abundant as they are now.
Right. Yeah, that kind of makes some sense. Well, look, John, you've been around a long time. I respect everything you've done, one way or the other. Excuse me?
No, I haven't been around as long as you.
No, that's for sure. I mean, geez, I've been around now 30-something years. Long time. Yeah. But I'm still here. This is actually my passion. I don't really in fact, I don't make one dime on it, but I'm pretty much retired. So, I'm sitting here watching everything that's happening and there's no one doing anything about it. I'm going to just get into one thing for 1 minute. And I'll give you an example. You got these guys that have been fishing shark off the beach like forever. And now there's a reg coming in that's going to seriously restrict them. And look, I get that many of the fish they're targeting are, not that they're targeting them, but many of them that are being caught are protected sharks. But many of the boaters catching sharks are protected sharks. And so they've been singled out. They basically, I don't know if you know this, they're going to shut them out of the fishery. They're forcing them to use a 12-inch leader for shark. They're not allowed to deploy. They were deploying with drones and kayaks. They're not allowed to do that anymore. Well, they're coming close to this decision. So, we're being attacked on every angle. And I just see it that way. And remember, I'm sure you know this, but the best thing for striped bass, shark, and everything else is if no one fished for them. That would be the best thing. Nobody was fishing, but is that what we want? I don't think so,
Now, there's a lot of folks who constantly use the refrain, whatever's best for the bass. Well, guess what? Whatever's best is if nobody touches them.
Exactly.
And I'm not down with that. And I don't think they are either, but you still hear it over and over again.
Yeah, some of those guys, look, this is what I'm going to kind of close with in that, and I'm not including you in it because you're kind of really not in it as much as you were, but we have dinosaurs in New York that are representing us. We have people that are sitting in very powerful places when it comes to fisheries decisions that claim to be speaking for us, and nothing could be further from the truth. And I will tell you, we will start targeting each board member on the MRAC, and we're going to go after the ENCON committee on all these things, and we're going to start getting legislators involved once again because we're getting run over. And that's got to change.
It's interesting that if you talk to anybody on the decision-making side, particularly the legislative side, they don't want to touch fisheries because it's such a contentious issue. They realize they're going to lose votes one way or the other. So and that's part of the reason we don't have a legislative commissioner at ASMFC right now. Nobody wants to fucking touch it.
So that would be picked by the administration, right? Because I'm thinking,
the Senate and I think the Senate, and the problem with New York is that there's nothing codified about how you pick a legislative commissioner. It just kind of happens. And right now, if I understand the political situation correctly, is nobody really wants to step up because it's so contentious.
Well, is that something you'd like to do?
I did it for 7 years.
I know.
I wouldn't make a concerted effort to do it, but if a legislator were to come ask me to do it, I would consider. Yeah. But dude, I got absolutely fucking murdered on social media for some of the positions that I felt were the right positions to take. And I don't think if I tried to get that position without being asked, I lobbied for it, I would get skewered again. I don't think that those guys want me there.
Right. Well, look, I'm working on some things. I've been reaching out. Well, there's nobody. And I've been speaking with a number of key legislators. See, no one does that. No one. They haven't heard from anyone. I got in touch with the head of the NCON committee. He's a Republican out east. I'm trying to think. I can't think of his last name. Oh, my God. I spoke Palumbo. And really nice guy. Had no clue that we have a saltwater license coming. So I'm not sure how they're doing it without talking to the legislature. I'm thinking it's got to be passed through the legislature. I had no clue about that. No clue about the striped bass situation because nobody's talking to them. No one. So they're wide open. In fact, I should have one on a podcast next week and discussing what they can do for us. So we need to get the legislators back involved because, John, you were there. What we did was pretty amazing. I mean, the bill that we closed on striped bass is still in force today, right?
Yeah,
as far as the commercial take, the bunker bill, all those things we did.
Absolutely. And I think if you have the will and the people to help out to move the ship in a different direction, in the right direction, then it's certainly possible and you could do it. It just, that doesn't seem to exist right now.
Yeah, well, people are in for a surprise. I mean, especially I got like about 6 months and I'm putting my last company to bed. After that, watch out. I'm going to have a lot of time. Although I will be in Florida for 6 months a year. So I head down there. You were talking about largemouth fishing. I head down a couple of weeks. And I'm on this gorgeous freaking quarry with huge largemouth, peacock bass. Nice. I love it. I do it every. In fact, I had Skinner out there.
That's how I grew up, is doing that. You know, that's how I got the bug. I lived walking distance from the Potomac, and from the age of 7 on, I walked down there every day with a bag full of plugs in a bait caster. That was my thing, man.
Well, look, it turned into look. You have a beautiful family. I was joking with you about what I said. I think you're looking great. You're a tough dude, man. You're kind of looking like an old salt, though. I don't know. You're like a salty captain.
I'm feeling pretty old, too, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be behind that helm.
Your son is going to be kicking your ass soon.
Yeah, I know. He's almost there.
All right, Johnny, look, it's been really, really good. Is there anything else you want to discuss before we close it out?
I don't think so, man.
Make sure you tell people how they could get in touch with you.
Yeah. It's nyctuna.com is my website, and there's a booking calendar there and everything. And you can find my email address and my cell number on the website also.
All right, great. All right, John, it's been really a pleasure. I always love speaking with you, and I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't worry too much about. Just don't get yourself wrapped in it. They do it to me. I don't read it. If I make a post on Facebook, I don't go back for like a month. So I don't really care what they say. You
know what? It's like you try to ignore it, but people keep sending you screenshots. But whatever. You got to have a thick skin. That's all. I think my skin's probably a little thicker now than it was back then when all that shit was going on because I just wasn't prepared for it. But
absolutely,
whatever, man.
Well, look, say hello to the wife.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, George.
Pass it along. And Johnny, I get this feeling we're going to be in touch in the near future. So, but good luck, man. I hope you have a really good close out to the season.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right, pal. That wraps up another episode of the New York Fishing Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Please remember to hit that subscribe button. And remember, you can listen to the New York Fishing Podcast at any place at any time. So when you can't watch, be sure to listen. Until next time, folks, I want to give, before I go, I just want to give a quick shout out to my friends over at enlightening.com. You know who you are, and I appreciate everything you're doing over there. So until next time, folks, tight lines all, and God bless America.
Thank you for listening to the New York Angler Podcast. You can find more on fishing New York waters at nyangler.com, your secret spot online.